tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. It's cliché in a way to say that our practice prepares us for intense moments in the world, moments like this. It's cliché partly because it's true, but also because we want it to be true. There's some way that at its heart, the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, the practices of this path are always about suffering. They're always about the world being, in a certain way, intolerable or difficult to tolerate, difficult to bear. So that's true. There's the sense in the story of the Buddha himself, particularly in the great myth that arose around his going forth, that was woven around his life story, the story of seeing the heavenly messengers, when he escaped the gilded cage, the privilege of his confinement, went out into the streets and saw aging, sickness, and death personified, which is a way of saying he saw poverty, he saw the suffering that happens inevitably to bodies, and that he was startled by seeing this into an urgency to understand something about this world, to find another way of being in it. Because it was clear that the thing that he had been raised to do, to enjoy the pleasures of the senses, to train himself for kingship, for ruling, for wealth, for participation in commerce, that these trainings didn't address what he now saw as the core issue. Part of what I think can be so challenging in responding or bringing our practice into a wise response with the world in moments of calamity is that there can seem to be this kind of tension between teachings that and practices that train us to set down activation, to move through intense feelings, to bring our individual selves back to a kind of equilibrium, to let go of fixation or craving, particularly the craving for things to be other than they are, which can feel like the instruction to let go of wanting things to be different, even though in a moment like this, it would seem inhuman or uncaring not to want things to be different. So this tension can open up in practice. And there have been so many attempts in Dharma communities to solve this problem. And they all say something like, don't turn away, but also don't get lost. Don't lose yourself. Don't lose your heart, your goodness, your clarity in the face of the calamity. It is important for those of us who have had the privilege to grow up not in a war zone or not in crushing poverty, not with endemic hunger or fear of violence. It's incumbent on us to find our way outside the walls of our own gilded cages. And of course, it seems like we do. We take in the media, the news, we see so much old age, sickness, and death, violence in the world. But there's also a way that so many of us can take this in, you know, like the media now is such that we can um, bear witness to the violence of the world from within our walls, as if we were in the Buddha's palace and we didn't have to go outside the walls. We could just, tune into the cameras that are always out there filming the aging and sickness and death, the violence that's outside. I don't think this means somehow that that's inauthentic or that we have to put ourselves in danger in order to feel the world. That's not, I think, the teaching. But there is something around how we have to let it move us, or we have to move wisely when it is already moving us. We are impacted. It's not a Dharma virtue to be feelingless or somehow impervious to the impact of the world. That's called freeze or collapse. And maybe in some cases it's called, deep renunciate life. Like you know, if you had become a monastic recently and you were in that part of your monastic training where the most important thing is to cultivate the basic foundations of the path in a very secluded way, um, then it would be appropriate for you to be doing that, right? There are formal structures into which you might enter that would support, a profound protected seclusion in the service of training. But most of us, including monastics who are not in that period of foundational training any longer, we are immersed in the world with everything that it contains. I think at the heart of our practice, of any good practice, you know, is first just a commitment to being real with what's happening, to not being in delusion about what's happening. I think this means a certain amount of being informed and understanding with some detail what's happening, I think is healthy. I'm biased toward a couple forms of understanding what's happening. One being historical education, so knowing not just what's happening now, but the conditions that led to this. Understanding how this moment in Minneapolis is not is not unconditioned by a summer in Minneapolis 5 years ago, and the murder of George Floyd there, and how an arc of a relationship and cascading relationships within this country between racial groups, class and caste groups, citizenry of many kinds, has metastasized into this moment. So historical consciousness helps us to hold a specific moment in a frame that gives it context and body and also some perspective, but doesn't pull away into an overly spiritualized perspective, right? I'm not suggesting the kind of, I think there's a kind of middle past historical perspective that's helpful, right? There's a different historical perspective that we sometimes take on in Dharma practice where we say, notice that the entire arc of human history since the branching of the Neanderthal and Denisovan and Cro-Magnon peoples is but a blip in the, cosmic cycle. Like, you can go there. That's big history. That's all right. It's helpful sometimes to get that kind of perspective. But there's a kind of, middle history, I think, that's helpful. Middle can mean a lot of things, maybe it means you have a felt sense for the 20th century and how it led to this moment. And maybe it means you have a felt sense for the colonial, half millennium and how it led to this moment. And maybe you have a sense of how, uh, the revelation of Christ unfolded through several large empires to lead to this moment. But there's a kind of context, I think, that can help us. So this is an orienting gesture. Another kind of discourse that I think can help is is a class and socially conscious understanding. So, listening to the voices of folks who have been immersed in relevant discourses for longer than we have, or deeper than we have, or in deeper study than we have, and particularly from voices once called subaltern or oppressed voices. So these might be voices reminding us that our outrage at the killings of Renee and Alex, two beautiful white folks in the last couple weeks, can be skillfully held in the history of a long sequence of killings of Black and brown folks whose names some of us may not know as well, murdered by ICE during this long year. So listening to the voices that say, remember that there's other contexts here also, right? Remember this in the context of a richer history. And this also, I think, is helpful and orienting so that we don't succumb to the idea that this is a sudden or out of the ordinary or startling calamity. One of the things that folks who understand this moment within oppression, within uh, within the long crisis of the last 50 years, let's say, to take one short, medium, recent frame, understands that this is not new or startling, right? That we can understand this moment in the history of a backlash against civil rights or a backlash against uh, immigrants' rights or a backlash against communism. And so our practice, our dharma, can support us in so many ways, not just in internal regulation and calm, but also in the the way that we are really training in wise view, in right view. Right? That it's samsara all the way down, not just in the subtle internal craving and release of craving, not just in how we as spiritual beings walk the middle way, but also not just as how uh, the long history of the Dharma encompasses the rise and fall of empires, and that can sound so neutral in a certain way. Empires come and go. They do. But come and go means people struggling, dying, being harmed, harming. So I think our middle way is to not turn away from or push away or suppress any of our natural, loving, enraged, wise, discerning responses to this moment, but at the same time allows the wisdom of the Dhamma, the wisdom of conditions and karma and the play of all the moments in the past that have led to this moment, allows this to be present in us. And this becomes the foundation of an equanimity, a kind of a resilience where we can say, I understand this moment. My heart struggles to understand it so often, but I understand even that. I understand what it is for the heart to be confused by violence and horror. Because my practice is to see samsara as clearly as I can. To say, yes, and this is dukkha. This is craving. This is the source of suffering. This craving for things to be a certain way. Not just as an individual psychology, but as a communal delusion, as a global species level error, or just natural state. There's a way that suffering is our natural state. It's one of our natural states. Another of our natural states is the freedom that comes when we see that suffering clearly. And so our practice must be to sit in the middle fire, present with it in a kind of fierce, heartful way. And so I'll just invite us to take a moment here as we close to just turn on the heart of wisdom, which is not different from the heart of compassion. Seeing it clearly means you can see how everyone is suffering in it. And we just sit together for a moment in the world and with the world, embodying the world as it is right now. So here's the ancient verse for impermanence and change. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya dhammino pachittuva niruchanti te sang upasamo sukho. Traditionally said at funerals, holding the recent dead and the harmed in our hearts. May they be free. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya dhammino upachittuva niruchanti te sang upasamo sukho. And for all beings everywhere in the world, seeking freedom, seeking safety. All things arise and pass. Understanding this deeply brings profound ease and peace to the world. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya dhammino upachittuva niruchanti te sang upasamo sukho. All right. Thanks for listening and being together.